Hi, and welcome to this episode of HR and Cocktails. And for those of you who are listening, we are in our brand new studio, and it is a speakeasy. So welcome to the speakeasy. We're excited to have you here. Today, we have our guest, Karen Falkler with Faulkner Wellness and Advisory. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So today we're going to talk about wellness. This episode is about wellness and how it impacts organizations, and not just physical wellness, but mental wellness as well. So Karen, tell me about you and Wellness, Faulkner and Advisory.
So I started my business because I saw an unmistakable need to have real conversations about wellness in the workplace. We spend our life at work. And my background was in corporate leadership development as well as physical therapy. So when I returned to the corporate world, I said, these two have to go together. This is going to save companies money. This is going to save people lives. So it's about risk, it's about life, it's about health and wellness.
Awesome. And I know organizations definitely need that. But before we get into that, let's make a drink. So what will you have today?
I would like to have 4 Roses neat, please.
Okay, 4 Roses neat coming up.
Thanks.
Our guest today, Karen, has requested bourbon for her cocktail, specifically 4 Roses bourbon. Last year, my husband and I had the opportunity to do the Bourbon Trail in Louisville, Kentucky last year, and we were able to visit the 4 Roses distillery. It was a beautiful distillery, and we learned a lot about bourbon on that trip. So a couple of things to note. Some people are like, whiskey is whiskey. The reality is that it's not. There are actual legal rules to what makes bourbon bourbon. And let me just say right here, I am not an aficionado of any type of liquor. I just like it, and I know what I learned when I was in Louisville. So please take this with a grain of salt, right? So the rules of bourbon. It must be made with at least 51% corn, and that mash bill, which they call it, is a variety of ingredients that they make and they ferment it, must be at least 51% corn. It must be aged in a new charred oak barrel. It cannot go into the barrel at any higher than 125 proof. It can't come out of the barrel any less than 80 proof, and it must be made in the United States. And that's what makes bourbon. Doesn't have to be made in Kentucky, which some people like to think. It doesn't have to. So let's get started with pouring our drink. Now, Karen likes hers she likes hers neat. Neat means no ice, just straight out of the bottle. So we're gonna pour Karen's, and you will notice that I am not measuring, because bourbon, it comes from your heart. You get as much as you feel like you want right now, right? So I'm gonna pour her a little pour. I feel like that's the right size pour. And then I like mine on the rocks. So rocks is typically on a nice bourbon or a nice drink is 1 large ice cube. When we went to 4 Roses, I actually bought the ice mold. So the ice is shaped like a rose, which is awesome. And I'm gonna pour mine. And I like mine on the rocks because the water opens up the flavor a little bit more. And so that's why I like mine that way, but there's no right and no wrong. So here we have 2 glasses of amazing bourbon.
Cheers.
Awesome, cheers. So when I was pouring this, I was talking about the difference between rocks and neat. I like mine on the rocks because I like mine to kind of open up, and the water kind of gives it a little bit of a different taste. But let's sip, and I want you to kind of talk about what you like about 4 Roses bourbon, because I know you are a bourbon person for sure.
So I started drinking bourbon about 2 years ago. I was out in Utah, and I was sitting up at this top of this mountain overlooking all of Zion Canyon. Mm-hmm. And when I drink bourbon, I actually think about being there. That was when I started to realize that there was something more out there, and that I actually had a bigger vision for my life. Mm-hmm. And so whenever I drink bourbon, I actually think about, putting it all together in that moment and saying, it's this background in PT, it's the wellness, it's the leadership development. And we can create this massive systemic change as it pertains to wellness when we start in the workplace. So when I drink bourbon, I think about how warm and fuzzy that actually makes me feel.
Oh, that's awesome. Awesome. And I think that it implies for us that bourbon is healthy. So I like that too.
Everything in moderation.
Yes, in moderation. Absolutely. Note to listeners, everything in moderation. So awesome. So when you think about wellness, right, what's your definition of wellness?
So wellness it's all encompassing. So our wellness is our physical wellness, our mental wellness, our personal and professional wellness. It's all of it. It's how are we walking through life each and every day.
Mm-hmm. And, so this show, our audience is business owners, executives, some HR people. So when you think about wellness, and specifically in the workplace with employees for business owners, why is it important?
So wellness starts with leadership. For years and years and years, I treated individuals and injuries, illness, disease, it doesn't matter what your job title is. But if wellness doesn't start at the top, it generally doesn't start in organizations. And as I was talking to CEOs and business leaders all over the US, by the time you get to that position, generally at some point you've had at least something going on physically that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I started having these conversations and I said, my gosh, we have to make a change and we have to get the leaders feeling better because that's going to help to reduce risk for absence. It's going to help to reduce risk for disease, but it's also going to help to enhance our sleep habits and our overall mental wellness, which is also going to help to enhance our ability to communicate and just see things clearly.
Yeah, and I really think it's important because I don't know that organizations understand the totality of wellness and the impact that it has on people. So, when someone's not well, whatever that well might be, right? Physical, emotional, mental health, they can't show up at work and give 100%, which means that it's going to impact the bottom line. And I think that for businesses, they get bottom line impact, but sometimes I'm not sure that they see that dotted line between wellness and the bottom line, right? Mm-hmm. So talk to me about mental health. So, I think that people have a relatively good understanding of physical wellness, working out, eating well, drinking water, bourbon in moderation. I think they understand that, right? But talk about mental health, because I think, there's an awareness of it. May was Mental Health Awareness Month. I think there's an awareness of it, but I don't know that people really fully embrace that mental health could be a challenge and that many of us deal with it to some degree, right? Mm-hmm. And there's still a stigma attached to it. So talk to me about the role of mental health and the role that it plays in organizations.
I'm glad you asked, because it's really important that we have real conversations about mental health and mental wellness. So at some point, every single one of us is going to have stress and, we are going to encounter hard things. What is happening for a lot of individuals is that our stress is greater than our coping mechanisms. As far as mental health, there are all kinds of drivers. They may be physical, they may be medical drivers, they may be social, drivers of mental health concerns. It may be medication side effects and things like this. It also could be things that happened years ago. If someone had a concussion in their childhood, they are statistically at a much higher risk for having mental health issues. And then as a nation, we're also chronically sleep deprived. And, we're running ourselves ragged. And it is having a profound impact on our mental wellness. And our mental wellness impacts our physical wellness and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And so the more we talk about it and the more we acknowledge it and the more we start to identify the barriers to mental health in the workplace, the safer and healthier we're all going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about stress because I think that in the workplace, people encounter stress. Like it's inevitable, right? Sure. And I think that different organizations have a different level of stress and different type of stress. Mm-hmm. So some of it can be based on a toxic work environment. Some of it can be based on just improper staffing and workload. There's a variety of things that lead into that. And those are things that organizations can control. Those are things that organizations can help because ultimately, if you have outside stressors, and then you come to work and you have additional stressors, it's compounded. So when it comes to workplace stress, which is things that organizations can control, what are some of the things that you talk about with organizations? Because you go into organizations, you provide them with tools and resources and coaching, right? What are some of the tools and levers that organizations can pull to limit some of that stress that they can control in the workplace?
Well, I think that in the workplace, there's so much that we can control. There are so many proactive ways that we can help to reduce stress. And the first step is often identifying what are some of the causes and drivers of stress. So is this a peer pressure situation? Is it that there's bullying? Is it that there are unhealthy and unreasonable expectations? Is it that people are struggling, just personally, and they're just coming to work, at home, they've realized, that there are things that are happening that are beyond their control, but they're doing a fine job of stepping around them at home. And then they come to work and they can't step around conflict. And so then sometimes that conflict is projected onto leadership, but sometimes it's projected onto teams. And so in those instances, it's sometimes saying as a leader, like, I can see that you're not who you normally are. So let's provide, some additional resources for you. Let's provide, access to EAP. Let's provide resources to coaching, leadership development, but kind of knowing the people on your team as individuals and recognizing that there's no one size fits all. There truly is going to be a unique approach to helping different individuals, but when we provide a safe environment for individuals, an environment that is filled with trust and, just objective listening, we can tremendously impact all of that in the workplace.
And you mentioned EAPs, and I think that that's important. So EAPs are employee assistance programs, and those are programs that organizations can offer at a very low cost. So even if you don't have other benefit plans, because a lot of our clients and our listening audience, they're small businesses, right? So they may not have the comprehensive wellness programs. They may not have the comprehensive even medical benefits, but EAP, low-hanging fruit, right? Talk about EAP and what it can bring to an organization, the vast resources that become available to those organizations.
Well, I'm glad you asked. So with a lot of my clients, I come in as an advisor and I partner with businesses just like yours. And I say, let's take a look at what we have. Let's take a look at the benefits. Let's take a look at insurance that you do have. Let's look at any wellness dollars that you have. And let's look at, the EAP programs. And then I partner with you and I say, all right, how are we going to help the staff to become more aware of the things that they have available?
Yeah, and I think it's important because, and one thing that people also need to understand, because I think a lot of times organizations are like, I don't want to get in the middle of what's going on with people. I don't want to know what's going on. If they're having problems, they just need to deal with that. I think it's important to note that specifically with EAP, the organization doesn't know that the individuals have accessed EAP. They don't know that the individuals are getting treatment through EAP. And most, if not all, EAP programs actually provide visits to mental health, many times up to 3 visits with a mental health provider, and that's covered under the EAP despite any insurance or anything else. And I think it's really important for organizations to understand that it's very low-hanging fruit. It's an inexpensive benefit to provide, and it allows people to access some of those things. Because as you said, people may have childhood trauma that they're dealing with, family trauma that they're dealing with, and they don't have the coping skills. And going to that, provider that can provide them with some of those skills and strategies to be able to cope with that is really useful and beneficial. One other thing that you mentioned was how you provide, coaching, and you come in and you talk to the organizations, and that it has to come from the top down. What does that look like? What types of conversations are you having with leaders to help them understand the ROI and the impact?
It is different for everybody.
Yeah.
It has been... that's why the second half of my business name is advisory, because again, it's not one size fits all. It looks so different. When I started my business, I came in here because I said, look, there's a problem and we're not well. And, we're just going to solve this as best as we can. So for some organizations, it's finding, more of those wellness solutions, finding like, what do you have on site that's being underutilized? Like, leaning into the physical, there are some businesses that have, gyms on site and standing desks and things, tools that are already right there for staff, but staff isn't using. So coming in and objectively talking about that. Sometimes it's coming in and talking with the leader as to how they are presenting themselves and how that may be influencing the way that their team is feeling or leaving and why. And so sometimes it's, just finding out what the barriers are for their individual success. And then, even last week, I was doing a session with a company and we were talking about communication and just, leaning into the mental wellness. During the pandemic, a lot of people went into fight or flight mode. And now they're trying to return into the workplace and everything feels like a threat. And so it is providing an opportunity to enhance the overall wellness, help people gain understanding and clarity to be more proactive than reactive, but also helping teams to really learn to identify the communication needs of each other because we all have different needs. Most people need one of four things. They need control, attention, harmony, or safety. And we tend to presume that we all need the same thing and we tend to communicate that way. But sometimes it is, really valuable to take a step back and say, all right, wait, who is this person? What's going on? And how is their unique communication style influencing what's happening at work? And so in this way, we're starting to relearn how to communicate because for 2 years, we weren't face-to-face with people. And so we forgot to some degree, how to successfully, meet the needs of others. And so then that creates unhealthy expectations. Things take longer than necessary. And so it's really partnering with organizations to find out what's going on. And just like working in medicine, what is the root cause? And let's find a reasonable and healthy solution that's going to help you to save money, be more productive, and just help everybody be the best version of themselves, both professionally and personally.
Yeah, and I really do appreciate that, the communication piece. And what I also heard in that was change management. We are shifting from, fight or flight mode, having to adjust to, quite honestly, unprecedented circumstances, to now some organizations want to go back to exactly how they were. There are some people, they're like, I'm not going to do that. The communication of that. And, I think it's important to also go back to, and I think that this is something that many people don't always think about as leaders, is that, many leaders did not do a good job of communicating when the pandemic first hit. People didn't know if they were going to have a job. They didn't know what was going to happen. Is my company closing? So there's a lot of trauma involved in that. And then the communication plan for how we're going to come back, what does work look like, duties and responsibilities, all of those things. And then so the change management and communication around that, and now expectations. But what I also heard again was the change management piece of that and the communication around change management and the importance of that. So if you had to tell an executive, you have to say to an executive, here are, 3 or 4 takeaways that I want you to take away for you to consider and implement as it relates to your role in health and wellness in your organization. Again, keeping in mind that there's going to be some customized solutions for the organization, but what are some things that I could do as a leader to take some steps today?
So one of the first things that I do with a lot of my clients is I have them simplify a lot of things, because we overcomplicate everything. We think that we can fit 10 pounds of things into a 5-pound bag. So I say, all right, take out a piece of paper, write the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number 1, I want you to put yourself first, because most leaders that I've met do not take enough time for themselves. And this is creating all kinds of problems, down the pipe. Number 2 is look at roles and responsibilities, your roles and responsibilities Like what are the things that are creating that feeling of fuzziness at the edges? During the pandemic, because of the way that things shifted and people having to, again, the layoffs or people having to leave their jobs to take care of children or things like this, for many organizations, there are people wearing all of these hats. And it's confusing as to what the priority is. And it's, people are trying to multitask, but they're getting pulled off task all the time. And so it's, prioritizing yourself and your wellness, but then making sure that your staff is very clear on what their roles and responsibilities are. And even in some cases, rewriting simple job descriptions and saying like, this is where we are today. It's not where we were. It's what is our vision, mission, values? Who are we? Why are you here? How can I help you get where you want to go? And how are we going to work together to drive the mission of this organization forward? Because the reality is everything in life is temporary, but it's how are we going to maximize this day and this moment? And so, those are the first two things that I usually start with is like, let's make sure that you're good. Let's make sure that your team knows what they're doing. And then let's make sure that you are successfully delegating the things that you're able to delegate. I was talking to a business leader last week, and he was expressing his frustration at all of the ways that he has tried to figure out how to fit more stuff into his day and time block. And I said, let's look at your communication style. Let's look at who you are and what you're really good at and what you're really not good at. And then let's delegate those things because it's creating stress for you. It's creating frustration for you. And you could be focused over here instead and be so much more successful. And so it's kind of just taken that objective look at what's going on, where are we going, and how are we going to be much more proactive than reactive now?
You mentioned bullying in the workplace, right? And I think that many people would be surprised that bullying isn't just coworker to coworker. Many times it's manager to employee. Sometimes it has to do, to your point, that those individuals don't have any other outlet, right? So can you talk to me about what bullying can look like? Because it's not always somebody walking up to you and shoving you, right? In the workplace, it looks different. And it can be passive aggressive. It can be a variety of things, right? So what does that look like in the workplace so that our listeners and leaders that are listening to us can know when they see that type of behavior that it is bullying? Because again, it's not always as overt as pushing someone.
So when I look at the umbrella of bullying, I think that in general, it's providing an environment that doesn't feel safe.
Okay.
When I think about some of the things that I have seen and heard about since I started my business, I have had examples where, again, going into communication styles, some people are just very direct and succinct. And when you're talking to somebody who is very, introverted or quiet or like, you're not always going to know how they feel, sometimes that can feel threatening. Sometimes there is there's another kind of person who is quick to make fun of themselves, but if you make fun of them, oh my gosh, they carry it around with them for a long period of time. And then it makes them just kind of feel awful on the inside. Meanwhile, this leader has moved on. Like they think if this person had said that to the leader, they would have been like, oh, no big deal. All right, we're moving right along. And so it's kind of becoming aware of like, again, is your person introverted, extroverted, but also recognizing their style. The other things that I have had, have spoken about are people who put people into really uncomfortable situations because of their beliefs. And so they start to talk about them and they think that everybody is in agreement. But because of the bystander effect, people don't speak up because they don't want to be the only one to say something. Other things that can happen, and I do a lot of work in construction and architecture, engineering, male-dominated industries, when people are like, suck it up, tough it up. But someone, maybe is going on with something outside of work. They have absolutely no idea because they're not going to bring it into work. They're not going to say, I need help. They're not going to say, I'm not okay. But on the inside, that is the straw that broke the camel's back. So those kinds of things can happen. And then, of course, there's just the overt, let's all go out for happy hour. Why aren't you going out for happy hour? When people are recovering, when people are, just trying to make life changes, and then that kind of peer pressure happens. So it can take a lot of different forms.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. And I think it's important for leaders to understand what bullying looks like and how it shows up, because I think that people don't always understand it, Mm-hmm. So I think we've kind of covered a lot of topics, but what size organization what sizes of organizations do you work with, and what does an engagement look like with you? If someone said, hey, I listened to Karen today, I think she is awesome and amazing, I need her in my organization. Talk to me about what types of organizations work with you and what does an engagement look like? And I understand there's a variety of services that you offer.
Yes. So again, not one size fits all. So I work with leaders who want to build strong leaders, and I work with leaders who want to enhance the wellness of their teams. I have worked with small businesses. I have worked with businesses that are 28,000, to 500,000 employees. They've been all different sizes. And for me, sometimes we do executive coaching. Sometimes we work with strategic partners like yourself to really just take this business, solve some problems, and help every person there to the best of our ability to move forward and truly extend the length and quality of their life as well as their work experience.
So what have we not covered today that you think we should talk about?
Oh, my goodness. I don't know. I want to learn more about your plans for this year.
The plans for this year. Well, the plans for this year, quite honestly, are to, continue to partner with people like you, because our clients have such varied needs, and we are not experts in the wellness and coaching world, right? So we need to leverage our partners just to make sure that we're creating an experience for our clients that's all encompassing, that includes all of the wraparound services, because HR is important, but the reality is that the experience that people have in an organization is what keeps them there, makes them productive. I know that engagement is such an overutilized word. I think that people have probably, made it almost be, like a cliche, but engaged employees are more productive and they impact your bottom line a lot more. And so the more that we can provide them with resources and the more that we can equip leaders, right? So what I've heard you say today is that leaders need to be more aware, that they need to communicate better, that they need to get to know their employees so that when someone's not being themselves, that they can say, hey, Karen, listen, you seem a little different. Are there resources that I can provide to you? And of course, with my HR hat on, we don't want to, offer them something that may not really be there. So we don't want to say, hey, Karen, are you depressed? Are you having some type, we don't want to offer that in as much as we want to say to them, hey, we have resources to help you. And if you need to take advantage of any of those resources, because I noticed that you're not really yourself, please feel free to, take advantage of them. So, this has been a wonderful conversation. And I know that our listeners will be able to take away several things, if nothing else, to be introspective and to really think about how they show up in their organizations, because as leaders, we set the tone every day for our organizations. We set the tone for how our managers manage, and we set the tone for the culture and the experience that people have in our organization. Is really important, particularly in small organizations, because, listen, it is difficult to get people. It is difficult to get people to come to work, and it's absolutely difficult to get people to come to work and do what we need them to do consistently. So I really appreciate this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you all for listening today. We are so excited to be here, and we can't wait to see you on the next episode.
Thank you so much.